Okay, Kate, so as we're talking about DE&I, I've got a specific question around diversity. Because I think, growing up, or if you think of, I think most people, when they think of diversity, obviously there's gender diversity, maybe racial, ethnic, national diversity, things of that nature. But I think these days, when folks in the private sector are talking about DE&I think the concept of diversity actually goes way beyond that. Can you maybe walk us through that a little bit more and break it down into some of the pillars or I guess the way that you frame that internally?
Yeah, definitely. There are so many different types of diversity, it'll be impossible to list all of them. But gender, obviously, as you mentioned, and moving away from concepts of just male and female, but also to trans and non-binary inclusion. Sexual orientation, so looking at employees and modern families in the workplace, so making sure that people have the support for their families, whether it's adoption, surrogacy, whether people can have their partner on their medical insurance if they are married or not. Age diversity is something we look at a lot now, particularly in markets like Hong Kong and Singapore, which are aging very quickly, as we know. So making sure that we've got inclusion of people, whether they're, Gen Z or the older generations, and understanding their different ways of working. Looking at ethnicity, language is something, especially in markets like Hong Kong, where people speak multiple languages. How do we know what language is going to make people feel the most included, which can have complexities when you deal with different clients internationally as well, and different working styles. And then ability is something we look at a lot as well. So cognitive diversity, different ways of thinking, the diagnosis rates of conditions like ADHD, autism, dyslexia increasing. So we know we're operating in a neurodiverse environment. How do we harness those different ways of thinking and working to deliver better outcomes for our customers and clients?
Yeah. Okay, so on the last one, that makes a lot of sense to me. And as a father of two special needs kids, I mean, very kind of minor special need, but it's interesting how the language in that space has changed so dramatically. Our understanding of the way that people think, their perception, it's kind of amazing, I think, in terms of like the progress. But I personally would not have really thought about that from a diversity standpoint. But again, as a father, like I'm very happy to know that the modern workplace is more inclusive, more accepting, and works hard to make sure that people can find good opportunities. But that's looking at it from a father's perspective. Let's talk about it from a business perspective, because a lot of our participants either are or will be business leaders. What's the business case for this, right? I mean, you have a job which probably as soon as 15 or 20 years ago wouldn't have existed, maybe, I think. And in fact, if you go back far enough, in terms of a business school context, I think there are very prominent academics who would have said that this kind of thing, shouldn't be done, or maybe would even be perceived from an economics perspective as like an unnecessary kind of tax or burden on a company. So what is the business case, and why would a profit-seeking bank push so hard for this type of not only position, but language within their organization?
Definitely. And DE&I is no longer just a nice to have, it is a business imperative. So to your point, organizations that are more diverse can have up to 75% higher profit than an organization that's more homogenous.
Okay.
We found that multiple research sources show that companies that are more diverse are more innovative, so there can be faster time to market for new products.
Okay.
And ethnically diverse companies and companies that have a higher representation of women at a C-suite level have higher net percentage points on their margins as well. Organizations that have employees that feel high levels of inclusion also have higher retention rates and more engaged and productive employees. So actually, when you look at the financial savings, some recent research by EY, they surveyed 7,000 people across Asia Pacific, and they found that where organizations have that sense of belonging, due to less attrition and then more productive workforces, there was actually savings for those industries of up to $120 billion US.
Wow.
So a huge financial impact.
And I can imagine, HSBC has kind of the trifecta in terms of geography, multicultural, and in terms of the industry. There's a lot of movement, typically, Hong Kong is a very transient place. Finance is a very transient kind of industry. And then you have this multicultural, like, tens of thousands of people. If you can indulge me just for a minute, I think for our learners out there, I have a legal background, and I think it's kind of an interesting anecdote is that although Hong Kong currently does not recognize same-sex marriage in terms of something that's allowable here, there was a case started about 10 years ago where there was someone in the finance sector who wanted to move to Hong Kong, and they were legally married in another country that recognized same-sex marriage. And when they came to Hong Kong, they applied for a spouse visa, or a dependent visa based on marriage. And originally, Hong Kong immigration denied that visa. And over multiple court cases where it was kind of on again, off again in terms of whether or not they were granted that status, for those that don't know, the finance sector actually got together and they wrote a public brief to the court system here saying that if you do not recognize these types of unions, then you are going to diminish the competitiveness of Hong Kong as a jurisdiction, and specifically finance as an industry here, because we're not going to be able to draw in the best talent. And so even at a macro level, I think there are a lot of examples to show how DE&I is really critical to the modern workforce. And I guess if I was to even take it one step further, especially because in my home country of the United States, there's a lot of political pressure now, especially on one side of the aisle around DE&I in terms of like whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's even constitutional. We have one presidential candidate who even just today said on his first day in office he's going to ban DEI as a concept in terms of training and things. And yet, the United States government has probably benefited more than any other government in the world in terms of drawing in diverse talent and being inclusive and equitable in terms of people's ability to obtain work and stuff. So I think it's often when we think of it in terms of the concepts or maybe the training that we do, sometimes we do it a little bit of a disservice unintentionally because it may seem a little, I don't know, frou-frou or on the side or something. But the reality is it's about creating workforces that people actually want to be in, communities they want to belong to, people that they want to fight for. And so I think really when I think about it as an employer, as a leader, like within my own organizations, that's kind of the way that I think of it. So anyway, I don't know if you have any, so I didn't mean to go off on that, but I'm just curious if any of that kind of resonated or.
I agree. And I think the other angle to look at it is most organizations will have some kind of end user or customer or client.
Sure, yeah.
And that's always your priority, right?
Yeah.
And those clients or customers that you're going to have are going to be diverse in nature as well. So being able to reflect that diversity, whether it's visibly or non-visibly, is going to be something which will resonate with your clients and help you win more business as well. Whether it's being able to talk to them about gender or LGBTQ plus or neurodiversity or caregiving, if you can resonate with that client, like ultimately they're going to be loyal to you. And again, research has shown that there is higher client loyalty to organizations that have visible diversity and inclusion policies and practices.
Yeah, it reminds me again in business school of the case studies that when we look at them in hindsight, they just look ridiculous. But obviously, not very long ago, even my parents' generation, the vast majority of the people who were looking from a marketing standpoint, doing marketing research and consulting companies on their sales and marketing practices, they were men talking to men. And the basic research showed that 70 to 80% of consumer spending at that time was done by women, and they were buying all these domestic products, et cetera. And so just the very simple, change, which was it took a long time to actually like sink in and have them adopt this, was the idea that, oh yeah, if women are buying these products, we may actually want to have them in the room kind of discussing these things. So again, in hindsight, it may seem or look kind of silly, but the reality is we kind of have to force some of these types of integration or concepts. Otherwise, you get stuck in the same type of groupthink for a long period of time.
Those policies and those examples you've used, though, there are so many that are still in place today.
So many, yeah.
We were just talking the other day about perimenopause and women that are experiencing hot flushes in the office. And the temperature for most offices across the world is based on that of a male employee in the US. It's just set to the same temperature everywhere. And that's never been revisited, despite the fact that men and women have different body temperatures typically, and the fact that women go through these hormonal changes which will result in different body temps as well. So many examples that have still not been addressed. It's really interesting.
It's really interesting. Thank you.